Lockdown. The word alone can freeze the air. The flicker of fluorescent lights, the sound of sneakers skidding across polished floors, boys whispering in trembling breaths behind locked doors, wondering if this is the moment their world changes forever. Every siren, every announcement feels the same, until it doesn't. In the quiet chaos of a school filled with laughter one moment and terror the next, three stories unfolded, each one darker than the last. These weren't movie scenes. They were real, raw, witnessed by ordinary young men caught between fear and survival. They say every generation has its nightmares, but few are as chilling as what happens when innocence meets violence, when friendship turns into a lifeline, and when one wrong decision opens the door to horror. This isn't fiction. It's what really happens when a normal day at school turns into the longest day of your life. If you think you've heard school lockdown stories before, think again. What you're about to hear will stay with you, not because it's violent, but because it's real. Stay until the end. Every sound, every whisper, every heartbeat matters. And when you're done, ask yourself one question. What would you have done? Now settle in. Turn off the lights. And let's go back to the moment when the first alarm echoed through the halls. The morning began like any other. The hallways echoed with the laughter of boys slamming lockers, tossing backpacks, and shouting across corridors. But beneath that noise, something colder stirred, something no one saw coming. Ethan was the kind of guy who slipped through the cracks, not because he was shy, but because he had learned long ago that blending in meant survival. Eyes down, mouth shut, headphones in, routine. Every day the same taunts echoed through the cafeteria. "Hey, nerd, got my homework?" "Nice haircut, loser." He smiled it off, sometimes even laughed, but each joke left another invisible bruise. You could tell by the way he walked that he carried weight others didn't. A quiet heaviness, like every step was measured, cautious, afraid of drawing attention from the wrong crowd. He had mastered invisibility, but invisibility doesn't erase pain. The school wasn't evil, just careless. Teachers saw, but they didn't see. They noticed bruises on confidence, not skin. The boys in varsity jackets were untouchable, gods in a kingdom built on fear. Ethan's only safe space was the art room. He'd stay after class, drawing worlds that didn't exist, ones where no one yelled, no one shoved, and silence didn't hurt. The pencil was his escape. One afternoon, as rain hammered the windows, he stayed late again. The art teacher had gone home. The halls were empty. That's when he heard it. Laughter echoing from down the corridor. Familiar, cruel laughter. Three boys turned the corner, Noah, Chase, and Brandon, all swagger, all cruelty wrapped in confidence. They weren't just bullies. They were performers, and Ethan was their favorite audience. "Hey, Picasso," Noah sneered, knocking over Ethan's sketchbook. Pages fluttered like wounded birds. "Drawing your imaginary friends again?" The others laughed, their voices bouncing off the sterile walls. Ethan stayed silent. His hands trembled, but he kept his head down. That was his rule. Don't engage, don't react. But silence to them was weakness, and weakness was entertainment. Brandon shoved him against the lockers, the metallic echo cutting through the hall. "Say something, man, we're talking to you." His grin was wide, but his eyes were empty, the kind of look that feeds on power. Ethan whispered, "Just leave me alone." It was barely audible. They heard it anyway. "Aw, did you hear that? He talks now," Chase mocked, grabbing Ethan's backpack and dumping its contents onto the floor. Pencils, sketches, notebooks, everything scattered. A drawing slid across the tile, landing near Noah's shoe. He picked it up. It was a detailed portrait. Three shadowy figures standing over a faceless boy. The resemblance was unmistakable. "What's this supposed to be?" Noah laughed, holding it up. "You threatening us, freak?" Ethan's stomach turned. His voice cracked. It's not what you think. But the moment had already shifted. They tore the drawing in half, then into quarters, then into tiny scraps that drifted like ashes. "Here's your masterpiece, artist," Brandon sneered, walking away with a shove that sent Ethan to the ground. When they left, the silence returned, heavier than before. Ethan stayed there on the floor, surrounded by the remains of what little control he had left. That was the moment something broke. The next morning, he didn't sit in his usual seat. He didn't speak in class. His eyes had changed, calm, almost peaceful, but hollow, like he'd made a decision. His only friend, Caleb, noticed it first. Caleb wasn't popular, but he wasn't invisible either. He had that rare thing, empathy. "You good, man?" he asked between classes. Ethan just nodded. But Caleb couldn't shake the unease, the kind that hums under your skin when something's off. That afternoon, he followed Ethan to the library, pretending to study, just to make sure he was okay. He watched Ethan write something on a folded piece of paper, slip it into his sketchbook, and stare at it for a long time before closing it. Then he left without a word. Curiosity burned through Caleb. When Ethan left his bag unattended, Caleb peeked. Inside was the sketchbook, and between its pages, the note. It read, "Tomorrow, they'll finally listen." His heart froze. He didn't want to believe it meant what he thought it did. But something deep down knew. It wasn't just a phrase. It was a warning. Caleb ran to the counselor's office, stumbling over his words, trying to explain everything. The counselor's face shifted from confusion to concern, then to alarm. She picked up the phone immediately. Within minutes, the school entered lockdown. Sirens blared. The announcement echoed, "Lockdown! Lockdown! This is not a drill!" Desks were pushed, lights were cut. Boys hid in corners, their whispers trembling. Caleb's heart pounded. He wanted to believe it was just a misunderstanding. But the image of Ethan's eyes that morning replayed in his mind, cold and distant. In the chaos, officers stormed the halls. The intercom buzzed again. "Remain in your rooms." But behind the art room door, the silence was deeper, almost sacred. They found Ethan sitting at a desk, sketchbook open. He didn't resist. He didn't speak. On the page before him, a drawing of a classroom full of boys, heads bowed, eyes wide in fear. When they led him out, Caleb watched from behind the window blinds. Their eyes met for a brief second, one filled with guilt, the other with gratitude, like Ethan knew Caleb had saved him. The aftermath hit like a storm. Whispers flooded the hallways. The three bullies were suspended. The story twisted through rumor and fear. He was going to do something. He had a plan. He snapped. No one knew what was real, only that something inside that quiet boy had reached a breaking point long before the alarms went off. The system failed him before anyone noticed he was falling. Months later, Caleb sat alone in the art room. The smell of paint still lingered. He opened Ethan's old sketchbook, left behind after everything. Inside were pages of faces, familiar, haunting, human. The last drawing wasn't of the bullies. It was of Caleb, hand reaching out, light breaking through shadow. Beneath it, a single line written in careful, trembling handwriting. "Thank you for seeing me." Caleb stared at the page for what felt like hours. The world outside moved on. Boys laughed, lockers slammed, teachers scolded. But in that small room, silence spoke louder. Years later, every time Caleb heard the lockdown alarm test, his chest tightened. The sound carried ghosts, not of violence, but of moments that could have become tragedy. Ethan was transferred to another school. No one ever heard from him again. Some said he got help, others said he didn't. But Caleb held on to that final drawing, proof that one act of care could change a life. In the end, the story wasn't about a boy who almost broke the world. It was about a world that almost broke a boy. Because sometimes the quiet ones aren't dangerous. They're just waiting for someone to listen. The gym smelled of sweat, floor polish, and the echo of sneakers striking hardwood. Practice had just ended, and the boys' volleyball team filed out, laughing and shouting, bags slung over shoulders, unaware of what was coming. Ryan stayed behind, as he always did. He liked the silence after the noise. The rhythmic squeak of his shoes faded into the stillness as he packed his gear and waited for his dad's late pickup. The locker room was empty now, fluorescent lights buzzing like lazy hornets. He leaned against the cold tile wall, scrolling through his phone, the silence so deep he could hear his pulse. Then came the sound. Metal against metal, faint but sharp. A door slamming against its frame. Once, twice, then again, louder. It came from the back exit that led to the field. Ryan frowned, pulling his earbuds out. The sound stopped for a heartbeat, then came again. He stood, curiosity tugging stronger than fear, and walked toward it, each step echoing too loudly. Through the narrow glass, he saw a man outside. Hoodie, jeans, hands pressed against the door window. The man's breath fogged the glass as he shouted, "Hey, kid! I'm here for my son! Let me in!" Ryan hesitated. The guy looked too old to be a student's brother, too young to be a teacher. Still, his face carried urgency, desperation even. "Please," the man said, voice trembling. "He's hurt." Ryan's stomach twisted. He should have gone to the office or should have called someone. But instead, instinct and guilt made him reach for the handle. The man's eyes widened as the door clicked open. "Thank you," the man breathed, brushing past him, footsteps fast and uneven. Ryan blinked, heart pounding, watching the stranger vanish down the hall toward the gym. He sat back on the bench, uneasy now. He tried to shake the feeling. Maybe it was fine. Maybe the man was telling the truth. Still, something about the way he moved, too quick, too quiet, gnawed at him. 5 minutes later, the school alarm screamed to life. "Lockdown, lockdown! This is not a drill!" The automated voice repeated, cold and calm, while Ryan's blood turned to ice. He ran to the door, locked it, killed the lights. The locker room fell into pitch-black silence. His breath came fast. He crouched between the benches, phone trembling in his hand. Distant sounds of chaos filtered in. Running, yelling. A crash somewhere far off. The echoes made it impossible to tell how close anything was. Then, footsteps in the hallway, slow, deliberate. They stopped outside the locker room door. The handle twisted once, twice. Then came a knock. Ryan held his breath, praying whoever it was would go away. The knock came again, harder this time. Then silence. Total silence. He couldn't even hear breathing, until a shadow passed under the door. Someone was still there. The door creaked open. Ryan's heart froze. He had forgotten the side latch didn't fully catch unless slammed. A thin line of light spread across the floor, and in it stood a man in a mask. White, expressionless, eyes like black pits. In his hand something glinted, long, curved, wet. The machete caught the light before disappearing into the darkness again. Ryan dove into the nearest locker, pulling the metal door shut. His breath echoed too loudly. He tried to quiet it, pressing his hand over his mouth as his heart beat against his palm. The man's boots scraped across the tile, slow and searching. He was humming something, a tune out of place, light, almost cheerful. Then came the sudden slam of metal as he struck a locker door. Ryan flinched. Another hit, then another. The man laughed softly. "I know you're in here," he whispered. "Come out, boy." His voice was cracked, unsteady, the sound of someone breaking inside. Ryan's muscles locked. Sweat rolled down his neck. The machete scraped along the lockers, screeching like nails on bone. Then it stopped, right outside his hiding place. The man leaned close. Ryan could see one dark eye through the vent. "You're him, aren't you?" the man said softly. "You're the one who hurt my son." Ryan didn't move, didn't breathe. The machete pierced the metal with a scream of friction, the blade stopping inches from his face. Sparks flew. He clenched his fists, fighting the urge to scream. Then, sirens. Faint but growing. The man's head turned. The humming stopped. He muttered something under his breath, then yanked the blade free and bolted for the door. Ryan waited. 30 seconds. Then 60. Stillness returned. He finally pushed the locker open, legs shaking so hard he nearly collapsed. The smell of sweat and fear hung thick in the air. Another locker creaked open behind him. A boy stumbled out, bleeding from a shallow cut on his arm, eyes wild. "He's gone?" he gasped. Ryan nodded numbly. "He's gone." Minutes later, the police stormed in. Lights flashed red and blue through the frosted windows. Officers shouted commands, clearing rooms, sweeping corners. The man was nowhere to be found. Ryan gave his statement, words shaking. "He said something about his son," he muttered. "He thought I was someone else." The officer's face darkened. "We'll find him." They never did. The man vanished into the night like smoke. No record, no name, no trace, just a bloodstain on tile and a hole punched through a locker door. The school reopened 2 days later. The locker room smelled of bleach. Boys joked nervously, pretending the fear was gone, pretending everything was normal again. But it wasn't. Ryan sat alone that afternoon, staring at the patched metal locker. The scratches still spelled something faint. A jagged line of words carved in fury. "You opened the door!" Every time the intercom tested the lockdown system after that, his stomach dropped. The sound no longer meant safety. It meant memory. It meant the monster he let inside. He started locking every door behind him, house, car, even his own room. But the truth was, he knew the danger wasn't locked outside anymore. It was inside him. Years later, he still dreamed of that humming. The tune was never clear, only the rhythm. Tap, 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 3 knocks, the sound of a man asking to be let in. And sometimes, when the world went quiet, Ryan swore he could still hear it. Down a hallway, beyond a door, waiting for someone else to make the same mistake. Because horror doesn't always break in. Sometimes it just asks politely,